looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind, and it either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
Ho, ho, ho! Merry Christmas!
Sasquatch.
Well, I grew up in Carson, Washington, in Skamania County. So growing up as a kid, I would hear stories. Both of my grandpas were loggers. Up in the Gifford Pinchot, one of them was up around the Montesano area with his two brothers, Raymond, Elma area. And they had some pretty good run-ins with them up there. It got so bad that they had to be guarded. My grandpa, he moved from Maine and he ended up in Trout Lake, Washington. He logged up in there, and they had some go-arounds with them too. So it was just growing up with stories with them.
Yeah, there's definitely a long history of it here. And if you had loggers in your family, it wouldn't shock me one bit that you were hearing these stories growing up. If you would walk me into this incident in 2016, what were you doing and what happened?
Okay, so this happened on the southeast side of Mount Adams. I was turkey hunting. This would have been in late April or early May. It was the spring hunt. I had went up the week before, and I had put in a blind. And it was a logged area. They'd been actively logging in the area at the time. So there was the first landing, and then there was a second landing. But in between these two landings, there was an intersection that goes up the hill about 2.5 miles to some cabins that some friends of mine have, and we would stay there. So I went in the week prior, and I parked at the second meadow, walked down the hill, crossed the creek, went up, and there's kind of a bench in the hillside right there, and then it goes on up a couple miles up to the summit. I had just taken some baling wire and some cutters in there, and there was this L-shaped meadow that was in there, and these turkeys, it was a really good spot in there. They would roost up on this hillside. It was pretty steep. I went up to the east side. It was facing west and east, and then it turned to the left, and it went down about another 30 yards, almost to the creek. There was a row of trees in there, and then there was a creek right there. And it went down, and that's what the turkeys would come off of the hill in the morning. They'd go across that field and go down into the creek. So, like I was saying, I went in there the week prior, and I just took sticks off the ground, and I made a blind. I was probably 5 to 10 yards on the east side of this. I just made it out of sticks, bale and wire, and the cutters. And when I was done, it looked like a one-seat outhouse, and the door opened from the back. So I was facing west, and there was a shooting port in there. And then I just took these limbs and stuff that I had extra, and I set it on top. And I didn't need to, but I just did. And I didn't even tie them down. I backed out, went up, got my truck, and I left. And so that next weekend, I was pretty anxious about getting back in there hunting, opening day and all that. So I drove up there, and it was still dark. I should have waited a little bit longer, but I didn't. I came up to the first landing, and I parked on that. And I got out, got my stuff out, my shotgun, my bag, and everything. And off to the left-hand side of my pickup, there's about a 250-acre clear cut up on this hillside. And I took off walking up the road in the dark. And I was, like I said, I was going to go to the second landing. Well, it was still dark enough that when I got to the intersection, I thought, I don't want to really scare these turkeys in case they're roosting, because where I was going to go through, I've seen them in there roosting too. So I thought, I'm just going to go up this intersection, up this road. I went up about 300 yards up, and it kind of climbs uphill and it flattens out. When I got up there, I got it, like about 300 yards, and I took a left. And it was still pretty dark, but I know the area so well, and it's not really heavily wooded like the Gifford is. It's more pines and oaks and kind of low scrub trees. So when I went across there, I started dropping down into the creek, and it was really wet. It had been raining. It was super quiet going in, super quiet as far as making noise and stuff. And I went down to the creek, and I crossed the creek, and I went up the other side and got up on the hill there, and I started making my way down to my blind. As I got down to the blind, it was just starting to get light out where I could kind of see the ground. And then I did have a little red pin light with me. So if you held it down and you hit it, you could just barely see the ground. That's kind of what I used to get across the creek and up the other side. But as I got down to the blind, I noticed that the top had been taken off of it, and it was laying on the ground in front of the door. I'm kind of looking at that like, well, how did this happen? Like, why is everything laying? I couldn't even open the door. So what I did was I thought, well, whatever. And I just picked up the sticks and I put it up on the roof, and it was quiet. It was super quiet. I went in the blind, got set in there. I put my backpack on the left, my shotgun on the right, and I was just kind of waiting for daylight to come in. It was getting lighter and lighter out. It wasn't full daylight, but it was getting light enough to where I was thinking about getting my calls out and just kind of getting things ready to go. It was kind of like the forest was waking up. You start hearing birds chirping, you hear things moving, it just kind of like the wake up of the morning. And it was kind of a flat light situation to where, I don't know if you know what that is or not, but everything, you can't tell depth. It was just kind of in between daylight and dark. That's kind of where I was at in this whole thing. And as I was kind of coming out of that, where I could start seeing what was going on, I want to stop right there and tell you about this meadow. Okay, this meadow, I was on the east side of it. I was facing west, looking at Mount Adams. The right side went down about 60 yards, and it made a left. The left side went down about 40 yards and made a left. And then it went down, 20 to 30 yards. I'm not really sure about that, but it doesn't really matter. And then there was a row of trees, and then it dropped down into the creek. So I was up in the trees. I would say I'm about 50 yards to that left-hand turn and it was pretty brushy along there. Heading towards the creek, it got brushier and brushier as you went. But so as I'm sitting there, all of a sudden, I kept hearing things around me, and it sounded like all of a sudden I realized it sounded like people talking. Like it's like right on the edge of your hearing. Some people call it samurai chatter, but to me it was more like mumbling. It was just mumbling. And I could see through the blind. It was just sticks and there was gaps in them. And I'm looking left, right. I even opened up the back door and I even stuck my head out. And I'm like, where's this coming from? I put my face up to the blind and I was like, it kind of sounds like it's coming in front of me. So I actually got up and put my head out the blind. Had it completely out my shooting port. And then I realized it was coming from in front of me and off to the left. So I sat back down and I'm like, sounds like there's other hunters in here. But it's kind of some private property up in there. And I'm like, and I'm 10 miles from anybody. There is no house within 10 miles of me. I mean, I'm probably 5,000 to 6,000 feet up on the mountain. A good 6 miles or so, 5 to 6 miles up. And then I did. I got kind of peeved because I put all this time and effort into this. And I'm like, these guys are right here. They know my spot. So I was getting ready to get out of the blind. I wasn't even going to take my shotgun with me. I was going to walk down there and tell them, hey, you guys need to get out of here now. It's your one chance to go. Just go. And it's getting lighter and lighter out. And I can still hear this talking. So I was just getting ready to go out the blind, and I could see off to my left-hand side, I could see movement coming through the trees. And I thought, what's going on here? Is this guy coming out to watch this edge of the meadow or something? Well, when this thing came out, it was about 5 yards off this corner, and there was some low scrub trees, and it just oaks, pines, and like really scrubby stuff in here. Well, it was bent over to 45 and it bent down and it stepped up out of there and it stood straight up, but it was only about 2 feet out of the trees. So when I'm looking at this, it took me a minute for my brain to figure out what I was looking at. I was like, is this a hunter? And I was like, no. I was thinking, is it a ghillie suit? And I thought, no. And I was thinking, man, this is a bear standing up. And I thought, no. This is way too tall. And I'm like, what am I looking at? And then it freaking dawned on me. This is what my grandpas were talking about. I said, this is a freaking Bigfoot right here. And I was like, holy shit. I really started to panic at that point. And this thing never moved. It never looked at me. It never moved its arm. When it stood up, it froze. And it was looking up on this hillside to the north. He was looking north and I was looking west. I was starting to panic and I was reaching for my shotgun and I thought, no. Don't do that. Don't just stay here. Don't move. Don't make a sound. Just don't move. So it did. And it was only out for about a minute. I think it's only, this sighting was only about 7 minutes, and I think I seen them all, or both, for about 3. So it was looking up on the hillside, and it did a murr with a chirp on the end of it. It did it 3 times. It never looked at me. It never looked any direction. It just looked up on this hill. And then all of a sudden, after about a minute of standing there, it just bent over and it ducked under these trees. It walked backwards. And then it went over to where it came from. And then I couldn't see it. Well, I was thinking about bailing, man. I was like, dude, it's time to go. And something in my brain just said, don't move. Just don't move. I don't think it sees you, man. Because I had the wind blowing in my face. It was blowing from west to east. And I thought, just don't move, man. Just don't move. Because I was really starting to panic. Because I think this one was around 7.5 foot tall. So about 2 minutes goes by, and I see movement again. It's coming back out. And then it came out in the same spot. It ducked down and it stood up. It was about 2 feet out of the trees. And it instantly did the same thing. It did that murr. Real low murr with the chirp. And yeah, I can't do what it did. I try, but I sound stupid. But so it stood there for about, I would say about 20 seconds afterwards. And it just stared on the hill, never looked at me, never looked left, right, up, down, never moved. So then I seen it flick its left wrist. It never moved its arm. It just flicked its wrist, just flicked it. And I think that was a signal for the other one to come out, but I didn't know it at the time. As I'm watching this, I happened to notice movement coming out again where this one came from. And I thought, oh shit, there's another one. There's two of them. Well, at this point, I was really starting to panic. I mean, I was like, oh my God. I don't know. In my brain, I was thinking, this could be life ending right here. You know, like something bad could happen. But when this one came out, it came out in the same spot and it stood up right behind the one that was standing there. But I don't think it had enough room to stand there behind it. So when it came out, it turned left and it was standing off the left shoulder of the one that was facing north. But it was looking more northwest, where this one was looking north and I was looking west. So I was really, really panicking. And man, my brain was screaming, don't move. Just don't do anything. Just stay here. Just watch them. Because I didn't think that they seen me or knew that I even was there. The one that walked out, it was about a foot shorter than the first one. And it wasn't quite 90 degrees to me like the other one. Oh, and one thing that I want to say, they look black, but they look gray. And they both look the same. So this one turned just a little bit more towards me. Just not, I think it was, its left shoulder was in the brush or something, and it just turned a little bit. Well, at that point, I could tell that that was a female. And then it turned again within just seconds. It just turned just enough. And I was looking at this one, and I noticed two black stripes under. One was under her right arm, and one was on, well, I say her, it was on its right hip. And I was looking at that, and they were horizontal black lines going across there. And I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. This one looks different than the first one. Well, when it turned the second time, not 90, but just almost, I could see just a little bit of a black head sticking out between her boobs. It was like there was an infant holding on to her, and she had her hands down in front of her. Like I could almost, just below her elbows down, I couldn't see, but everything else I could see up. And then I'm thinking, oh shit, this is a female. Now they got an infant. Yeah, I was about to lose it on this one, but I kind of held it together. So they only stood there for not very long, about 45 seconds to a minute after that one walked out. And he never moved. He never did any. It was like all their movement out in the open was like kept to a minimum on both of them. They just stood there. So he either huffed or grunted. He just went, oof, or oof. As soon as he did that, they both turned and walked west. They walked across the meadow away from me. And I sit there and watched him, and she fell right in behind him. It was like they were marching. It was like left, right. She was like stepping in his steps, and they went right on across and right up through the trees. And I sit there for probably about 5 minutes, kind of letting them get some distance between us because they were heading right towards Mount Adams. So then I was like, it's time to go. I grabbed my shotgun and my backpack, and I stepped out the back door. And I looked around for a good probably a minute and a half or so, like looking everywhere. And then I went right back up the hill. I kept the blind between me and them for cover. And I was going away from them. And I pretty much retraced my steps out and got my truck and I left. I don't think they knew that I was even there. And I'm sure if there was a female and a little one involved, I'm sure if he'd have found out I was there, he probably would have came right at me, giving her time to get away. Well, thank God that didn't happen, but.
And Virgil, you mentioned that they were black and gray. Are you talking about the skin color or the hair?
The hair color was black and gray. I know this is kind of a wild theory, but this really, really makes sense to me. Me and another buddy were over hunting. This happened in May. In October, we were over about 30 miles. And you guys got to understand where I live, it's going from jungle to arid to like semi-arid to arid. It's like total desert over here. Okay. So I was about 30 miles away. Matter of fact, I was in Bickleton, Washington. We were up on the hillside over there and we were hunting. And we come around the corner, and my buddy had a bear tag. And he goes, "Hey, stop, look. There's a bear right there." And this bear was up on the edge of a horse trough that was empty. And it was kind of standing up with its paws on the edge of this bear trough looking in it. And I said, "Hey, man, there's your bear tag." And he goes, "Yeah, man." So he shot this bear, and it was brown. This thing was solid brown. Well, it wasn't exactly solid brown. It looked kind of brown, but it looked a little lighter brown too. It looked kind of like two different colors. And we were about 175 yards away from this. Well, he ended up getting the bear. And as in the line of sight that we had to, it was easier to walk down the hill and kind of go down and then come up to the bear. Well, when we got to that bear, this bear was blonde. I mean, absolutely Suzanne Summers blonde. And I'm looking at this going, "Are you sure this is the right bear? Because the one you shot was brown." And he's like, "Yeah, I don't know, man. That's kind of weird. How is this thing blonde?" But I mean, it was there. It was dead. He had a bullet right in where he hit it. I said, "Wait a second." We were kind of baffled. I'm like, "Wait a second." I said, "I'm going to go back up. It's going to be tougher, but I'll go back up about to where you shot that. I want to look back on this bear." So I walked back up there. And I looked back on this bear, and this bear was brown with just a little blonde in it. And I'm like, I radioed him. And I said, "Dude, it's brown. It's blonde." He goes, "No, it's totally blonde." And I'm like, "Wait a second." So as I was walking back in line of sight, okay, so it was 95% brown at 175 yards and 5% blonde. I know this is a crazy theory, but I think this is what happened. So as I'm getting back towards it, I walk to about 95 yards to it. This thing's starting to turn colors. The brown is going away, but I'm starting to see the blonde more and more. So I get within 50 yards, and this thing is like, it's really hard to explain. It was like 50-50 or less than that. It was probably, 70% blonde, 30% brown. And as I walked up on it, it was 95% blonde, 5% brown. But when I was back there at 175, it was 95% brown and it was 5% blonde. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it kind of makes sense. I being in the Pacific Northwest and a former hunter, I kind of get what you're saying. Do you think it was the sun kind of changing the colors as you got closer?
No, the hair wasn't changing color. The distance was changing color. So if I would have looked at that at 200 yards, it would look like the hillside. But if I would have walked up on it and got closer, it's still, the brown on the hillside was going away and it was looking like more like oak leaves. And I know it's a weird theory, man, but I've always thought about that. I was like, dude, that's the perfect camouflage. So I got to looking at the fur, the very quarter inch of the tips of that fur. If it was alive and standing up, the fur would have been coming off the sides. The last quarter inch of that fur was brown, had brown tips on it. The rest of it was blonde, but it was covered up by layers of brown tips going up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense what you're saying. Let me ask you, when these two creatures came out at the closest, how close were they to you?
45 yards. Both of them were.
That's really close. For the audience, would you kind of describe what you saw?
Well, I had a full right side view of him. The female, not so much. She was kind of quartered away from me pretty much. But the male, a lot of people say they have coned heads. I didn't see any coned heads on these. To me, they looked round. Maybe I wasn't getting a full frontal view, but I didn't see any coned heads on them. The hair flowed right off the head, right down, all the way down to the bottom. He had longer, his arms were longer than ours, the forearms. Yeah, it was down around his knees. And he was about, I'm guessing, I'm 6'2", I'm guessing her height around 6.5 feet, maybe a little higher. And I'm thinking he was around 7.5 feet because he was a foot taller than she was. She could have been taller. I'm just taking a guess on that. And he was a big dude, man. This is a big guy here. The skin on his face was flat black. He had hair down around his nose, the upper lip area. The nose looked like, I've heard a hooded nose. It wasn't ape-like, and it wasn't like ours. It was more of a pug. The hooded nose is the best thing that I could actually describe that. And, yeah, and the skin on the hands were flat black too.
Did you get the feeling you were looking at more of a man, or did you get the feeling you were looking at more of an animal?
You know, people have asked me that before, and that's one question I can't answer. I honestly, I don't know how to answer that, even to this day. It looked human. I just don't know. I really can't answer that question. But I want to say they're kind of in between us and gorilla or apes, I guess. I don't know. I just don't. I've asked other people about that too, and they say the same thing. They're just like, I don't know, but they're intelligent.
It's very common for most eyewitnesses to describe what they're looking at, and they'll say somewhere between a man and an animal.
Yeah, he had a bigger brow, and the female did too. I could see her right eye. Hers wasn't as pronounced as his was, but they had a higher, or I don't know how you explain that, a bigger eyebrow than we did. So, and I didn't see any whites or anything. At 45 yards, to me, their eyes looked black.
You know, kind of going back to the vocalizations for a moment, I've actually heard that from other eyewitnesses where these creatures will do this murr and then chirp. And it's been a few years since I've heard it, but I've heard it a lot. And I've often wondered what that is actually about.
I heard this about 6 months ago. I was out here because I do a lot of predator control for farmers out in the valley here, out in the open fields during calving season. One day I was out helping a farmer, and I don't know why this didn't dawn on me, but there was a cow looking for a calf. It wasn't mooing, it was bellowing. And farmers that are listening to this, you know the difference when they're mooing, they're walking around, whatever. But when they're looking for a calf, because they'll hide their calves away in the brush and they'll go out and feed. When they come back, they'll beller. It's like a moo, moo sound. Well, that's to me what, and up in this area, the farmers for 6 months of the year, they'll put thousands of head of cattle up here and they just let them free range. And then this time of year, they'll go in and get them. I actually think this thing was actually trying to sound like a bellowing cow. That's the only explanation I have for that murr. It's like a murr, and those cows can get pretty loud looking for those calves. I mean, you can hear them a long ways off. So maybe that was something that they do to try to find each other or something. And that chirp at the end, I've never figured that out, but maybe it was trying to differentiate itself from a bellowing cow to one of its buddies, up on the hillside. Because if I was standing on that hill and I heard a cow bellowing down there in the creek, I'd have been like, just a cow looking for a calf. But if I would have heard a chirp on the end of it, I'd have been like, it's just a bird getting after the cow. But if his buddies are on the side and they're all migrating back and he did that murr with the chirp, well, he just differentiated himself from a cow. So they could tell, okay, this is not a cow looking for a calf. It's Marvin's down there. And we're all heading the same way. It's just an idea. I can't be sure of that, but I think that chirp had something to do with it, to like separate himself from a bellowing cow. That's what it sounded like. So,
yeah, it's definitely an interesting take on that vocalization. When you were looking at these two creatures, you kind of mentioned they look the same. Obviously, height is a little bit different, but as far as appearance goes, would you kind of compare and contrast the two?
She looked pretty much the same. They were both the same color. They looked black, but they looked gray. But the little one was solid black. That's how I noticed those horizontal lines going across her, under her armpit and across her hips. She looked just like him. You know what they looked like to me? I've only told one other person this. They look like a young couple that just graduated high school and they're about 20, 22 years old, just starting off in life. They looked young. I mean, he was in great physical shape. So was she, but it just looked like she just had this child. And you know how women have that look after they have a baby. It takes them a while to come back into shape. That's what she looked like. So I don't know how long it takes them to grow or anything, but the hair just flowed right down their backs, no necks on them. They got the traps coming right off the head, right down to the shoulders. She looked just like him. There was no difference at all. There's one thing that I would like to tell you. What I think happened on how I think this whole thing was a total accident on both of our parts. When I got out of the truck, my intent was to go from the first landing to the second landing, cross down the creek, walk up, and right where they were standing was right where I was going to walk through. Something was looking out for me or something. I don't know what happened on this one, but right at the last minute, I thought, well, it's dark enough. If there's turkeys roosting in there, I don't want to bother them. And like I told you, between the first intersection and the first landing and the second landing, there was an intersection there. And I decided, you know what? Why don't you just go up this intersection, get up on top, cross over, and go down into your blind? And that's what I did. So somehow I dodged the bullet on that one, because I would have walked. Either they would have heard me coming and moved off, or I would have walked right up into the face of them, both of them. Right where they were at was right where I was coming through. I think what happened was when I turned up that intersection and came up I was about 300 to 400 yards, because it's quite a ways up on top there. And when I came in, I think they were actually walking down that creek and seen that blind. And I think probably the male walked over there and pulled that blind off, looked in there, nothing was in there, and dropped those sticks right in front of that door. So when I walked in, I think they went on down from that blind and they were standing down in there, probably waiting for it to get a little lighter, just like me. I don't know what they were doing. But when I crossed, I think I crossed in. I think we passed each other and I crossed in right behind them. And I came down there, and that's when I found those sticks in front of that door. And when I put them up there, I think that's how this whole thing happened.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a chance encounter. And then you having the wind in your face. Obviously, they couldn't smell you. And like you said, they obviously had no clue you were even there. Tell me about this incident that happened 6 years later. And I get the impression it's kind of in the same area. What were you doing and what happened?
So this one kind of got out of control. Guns got drawn on this one. But at that intersection that I turned and went up, a friend of mine I went to high school with, he has a couple cabins, but they're about 2 miles or so, and it's on the same creek that I crossed. In July of 2022, my son was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington. He had brought 2 Army buddies down with him. The landowner's son that owns them cabins was up there, and they wanted to spend the weekend up at the cabins. And then they called me and they said, hey, you want to come up with us? And I said, sure. Yeah, I'll come up. I had to work that day. God, man, this whole thing got crazy on this one. But I got off work. It took me a while because I knew the boys weren't going to pack any food or anything. They had like, I don't know, probably 5 cases of beer and 1 bag of Doritos with them. You know how that goes. But so I packed up a bunch of food and stuff and took off. And I got up there. I went through the gate, shut the gate. I got up there about 9:30 that night. So it was just starting to get dark out and stuff. So I pulled up and they all come out and they had the music going and they're having a good time, 4th of July weekend. And we all went inside and we're talking and stuff. And well, I'll call the landowner's son Cal. He had just bought a really high-end knot. It was like $3,000 for this IR knot. So he wanted to go out, and we were kind of waiting for it to really get dark. And I had just purchased 2 AGM Rattler 640s. So they're really good thermals. They wanted to go play with them. I said, all right, I'll put some batteries in it for you. And So they grabbed their rifles and they headed out the door. It was getting pretty dark, and none of these ding dongs even started a fire because we're about 5,000 to 6,000 feet at this point. And even in July, it gets cold up there. So I said, well, you guys go down and play with these thermals, and I'll get the fire going and stuff. So the two Army guys that my son had brought down from Fort Lewis, they were in there, and I was talking to them. Because I was in the Army too, and they were really good guys. We were just BSing, and I was getting the fire going. And probably about 15 minutes later, all of a sudden, oh my God, it scared the hell out of me, man. My son and Cal came flying through that door. I mean, I don't even know how they even opened the door. They busted that thing open. They hit the wall, hit Callan, and he threw it back open. And well, they scared the hell out of me, man. I was like, jumped up. I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing? What's going on, man? Well, my son goes, hey, Dad. And he goes, hey, we were down there by the creek. Something started barking at us like a dog, but it was too loud. It was loud. And I was looking at him, and I said, there ain't no dogs around here. We're like 10 miles from nobody. There's no houses out here. There's nothing. And then Cal, he goes, no, you don't understand. Then it started growling at us. And he goes, this was not anything we've ever heard. So they were pretty flipped out at this point. So I'm sitting there looking at it, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I don't have to deal with this tonight. Why tonight? So I said, well, give me a thermal, give me a light. And I grabbed my shotgun, and it's a little riot shotgun. I use 3-inch Magnum double buck in and hold 7 rounds. I grabbed that. And I said, well, you guys stay up here. I'm going to go down and look around. I said, where were you at? And they said, we're down at the creek. And I was like, all right. One thing I should tell you and the listeners is when you go through the gate, you got to go about 150 yards, and then you got to drive across this creek. And as soon as you drive across it, you take a right and you go up about 40 yards to the cabin. So I was like, okay. So I go down to the creek. I'm looking around. I'm looking through thermals and just had the light on. I crossed the creek. Well, when you cross the creek right there, there's a bank that goes up alongside the cabin, and it's about 20 feet higher than the cabin. And there's a row of trees about 5 feet thick through there, and it's really brushy. You can't hardly walk through it. So, and I walked up about 3/4 of the way up that to the cabin on the other side. And I was looking around, and I didn't see anything. And so I came down and I crossed the creek, went back up to the cabin, and I went in there. Well, of course, the boys, they're all flipped out at that point. They're like, dude, man, they're talking about this. Like, that wasn't normal. And I come in and they're like, do you see anything? I said, no, I didn't see anything. I said, I think it's gone. I didn't want to tell them anything at that point. I just didn't want to bring up anything. They kept asking me what it was. I said, look, whatever it is, I think it's gone. Don't worry about it. Let's just keep on doing what you guys are doing. So they kind of opened up a few beers, and they're kind of calming down and stuff. But I just had this bad feeling. I was like, there's something wrong here. I just had this feeling like just something isn't right, man. Well, after about 20 minutes of them calming down, they turned the music on, they're partying and doing their things. My son and Cal and all of them decided they wanted to do some shooting. And I was looking at them, and I told them, I said, I don't think that's a good idea right now, guys. And they're like, why? And I said, I just don't think that's a good idea. Let's just wait till tomorrow. And they're like, nah, heck with that. Let's just do some shooting. And I'm like, oh, man, I just had a bad feeling. Well, this feeling would be confirmed about 25 minutes later. So this cabin faces west, and the front door and the back door faces east. And there's a big porch on the back side wall. Right off that porch, it's about 10 feet to the ground. There's a creek that runs. That creek that I crossed when I had my sighting, that's the same creek. And it crosses right there. And then the bank is about 30 yards past that. And it's about 20 feet tall. There, no stray bullets. There ain't no houses around. I mean, nobody's going to hear us anyway. And I was just like, God dang it. So they went out there and they fired their rifles and their pistols for a little bit. They were shooting at targets on the bank, and they got done with that, and they came in the house, and So the music, it all got turned back on, and they really started partying at that point. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go out and pick up some brass on the ground. So the only way to get out of this cabin is go out the front cabin and go out to the left and go around to the front down by that creek. And I was down there picking up brass and stuff, and for about 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden, off to our east, and I'm thinking this was about 250 yards out. Now, I heard what sounded like a WWF wrestler, like Hulk Hogan, going, "Whoa!" And then it went up into a really high pitch, like, "Whoa!" And it lasted for probably 10 seconds, and then it came back down. Well, when I heard that, I stood up and I said, "What in the hell was that?" Because I'd never heard that before. And I thought, it's time to go. And I took off running, and I did. Well, it was my turn to go busting through the front door. I go running through the front door. I don't even remember opening it. And they're like, well, I scared them at that point, man. I went running in there, and I said, "Did you guys hear that?" And they're like, "No, what are you doing?" I said, "Dude, something just yelled at us over here to the east side, about 250 yards out. I can't believe you didn't hear that." But they had the music up about a 9 on the Richter scale in this cabin, so it didn't really surprise me. So I told them, "Turn that music off and let's go out here and listen." So we did. We all went out on that porch they were shooting on, and we were listening. We listened for about 10 minutes, and then we all decided, well, I don't know what that was. They all went back inside, and they're like, it's probably gone, whatever it is. And I went out on the front porch, and I sit there for about 5 minutes to listen. I didn't hear anything, so I thought, well, yeah, whatever. It's probably gone. So I walked down, and I started picking up brass again for about 5 minutes. I had a whole pocket full of brass and everything. Well, this thing had crossed from the east side up to the north, and it was closer this time. This was probably only 100 yards out or so. And it did it again. I mean, this thing, he was pissed, man. It did that, and then it went down into that lion's roar, and I didn't even hesitate. I just took off running. Went flying through the door again, and they're like, "What are you doing?" Well, one of the guys heard it. He goes, "Man, what was that?" I said, "Well, whatever it is, it just yelled at us, and it's on the north side of the cabin here. It's coming closer." Well, that freaked everybody out. That's when the guns come out. I mean, all of us, we loaded up. About half of us, I went out with another guy onto the front porch, and the rest of us went out on the back porch. We were listening and listening, nothing, for about 10 minutes. And they came in, and they're like, "Wow, what's going on there?" And I said, "I don't know." Well, I knew what was going on. I just didn't want to freak him out and any more than the whole situation was getting. But I was out on the front porch with one of the Army guys that my son had brought down, and on the west side of the cabin, they were out on the east side. This thing had crossed and came down to the west side, and there was a great big slash pile. I mean, this pile is probably as big as a house. It was huge. And it was only about 80 yards from the cabin, if that. But where we were standing on the cabin, you couldn't see it because there was just like a little mound of dirt right there with some trees growing up. You had to kind of go down and around it to see the... Well, as we were standing there, this thing cut loose again, and I'm telling you, this thing rattled the frickin' doorknobs, man. You could feel it going through your chest in the ground. It was that intense. I looked over at one of the Army guys. He was back up against the wall. He dropped his weapon and was back up against the wall. I looked over at him, and he kind of had this bug-eyed look on his face, and he just took off running in the cabin. About that time, my son and the other guys come running out the front door, and they're like, "What is that?" I said, "Well, it's right there in front of it. It's right over that hill right here." So I went in there, and I didn't have a weapon. I picked his up, took it back inside, and he was like, "I ain't going out there, man. No, I don't know what that is." I said, "Well, I don't either." So, but it kind of made me mad. I was like, this thing's getting closer and more intense all the time. I don't know it's going to be right on top of us next time. I said, "Hey, I'm going out to find this thing." So I went running in the cabin. I grabbed my shotgun, some ammo, a flashlight. I said, "Who's going with me?" Well, my son and another one of his Army buddies said, "Hey, we'll go with you." I said, "Well, get ready. Let's go." So we all three went running out the door and kind of went down the hill and around this mound. And that's when my son asked me, he said, hey, where's it at? I said, I think it's right here by this. It has to be right here by this brush man right here. So we got within about, I would say it was 80 to 100 yards. We got out to about 70 yards. And I think it was on the back side of this. It was somewhere right in there. And my son goes, hey, I don't want to do this anymore. He goes, what's going to happen? I said, well, if it attacks us, we're going to unload on this thing. I said, I don't care. We're just going to blow it away. And my son goes, I ain't going any further. I'm not doing this. And then his army buddy goes, yeah, I'm done too. And we kind of got into an argument. I'm like, dude, you guys, I can't be out here by myself. You know, somebody's got to watch my back. And then they said, no, I don't care. We're going back. Turned around, started walking back. And I'm like, well, I guess I don't want to be out here by myself either. So I went back to the cabin with them, and we stayed in there that night. Matter of fact, I told them when we got back, I told them, I said, you guys better sleep with these rifles tonight, which we all did. And I said, you better keep them handy because I don't know what's going to happen next. But luckily, nothing happened that night. That was it. I kind of have a theory on that one too. I think the three of us running out there, kind of doing a show of force, I don't know, maybe it realized that, hey, these guys are serious too. So something's going to happen here one way or another. I stayed up that night. They all crashed out about 1:30 that night. I stayed up till about 3 a.m. because there was some big picture windows facing north and south, and we had the door right there. So all I had to do was spin around. But when we had one of he was the big guy. He was about 6'4". We put him on an army cot in front of that door. And we told him, man, anything hits that cot, that door open up, you unload your rifle right through that door. And I told him, I said, when you do, you roll off that to the right and lay on the ground because we're stepping up. And I told him, we're going to blow that door right off the hinges. That's the only thing that's going to be left, that door. Don't stand up, crawl back to us. But nothing happened. Anyway, I got up and kind of looked around, went outside, kind of went around the cabin and stuff. But yeah, we pretty much packed our stuff up that next morning, and we all left it together. We didn't leave we all drove out of there, opened the gate, went through it, locked it, and went on down the hill. So that was our encounter in there. And then Cal, my son, goes, hey, that ain't the first time that we've been growled at out here. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, no, we've been walking around out here the night before too, and had the same thing happen to us. And I told him, you guys better be careful out here. You know, unless your life is in danger or they got one of your friends or something, I wouldn't be shooting at these things. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a scary night. Very scary night. Do you think the gunfire set this thing off, or do you think something else set this thing off?
No, the gunfire. Yeah, because I think it walked up that creek. That was something I kind of just left out. The next morning when I went out of the cabin, I went all the way around that cabin. I went down to the creek and walked up that other side. And where the boys were shooting, like east, off to the left up there, and like I said, it was about 20-foot high bank. I found a spot in there where something could stand. And if you're standing, you could actually watch the cabin. But if you crouched down or knelt down, there was another like little window right there where you could watch what was going on. And I think when them boys cut loose with those rifles, I think that really pissed it off. I think they thought they were shooting at them, and they weren't. We didn't even know it was up there, but that's why I think they were shooting east. I think it took off running. That's why I think it yelled at us from about 250 yards, 300 yards away the first time. I think it made it mad.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't know what else would have set this thing off. And I've heard that lions roar before, and it does shake you. It's a scary account because you don't know really what's going to happen. I probably would have been up all night with my gun watching that front door too. You know, it's what else are you going to do? The very last incident I want to chat with you about, did it happen in this area?
Well, that happened in July 4th of 22. Me, my daughter, and a coworker it happened that October. We were up at the cabin, and we were further up on the mountain, about a mile up on the mountain in another valley. So there's a series of valleys that come off this. I mean, we're almost at the summit, so it's got valleys coming off in different directions. We were over into another valley, and the valley that I had the first encounter in, that's an elk calving ground in there. And that's a major creek that goes by the cabin, and the one I crossed 2 miles below it, it goes down into a nice flat valley, and that's where the elk from the southeast side of Mount Adams go down there and they calve out. And then, like I said, about June, they start going back. But there's another valley that they go up over the summit, and then they go up. It's a migration route through there. It's a really good place to elk hunt. So, yeah, just to kind of make a long story short on this one, it was my daughter, a coworker from work, and he was about to retire. He wasn't in the best shape. He was 65, and he retired a few months later. But me, him, and my daughter went up into this valley, and a fire had come through there some years before. There's a big open field you got to walk up, and it's a pretty steep. I mean, you're heading up to the summit, and then you cross over, and then you go back down in the valley. So this fire had burned up this valley, and there was about 100 feet of trees in there that didn't burn. So it's like a little hedgerow of trees in there, and there's like an ATV trail that goes through there, and that's where we went through this field, and we got up in there. And once we got up into that burned tree, I mean, there was a bunch of blowdown and deadfall from all these burned trees and stuff, and it was really, really hard getting through there. And I noticed that my coworker, he was having a hard time. My daughter was kind of struggling, and to tell you the truth, I was too. It was just rough going through there. It just took a lot of time. So I didn't take him really far down in the valley. So we went through this 100-foot row of trees, and we were about 50 yards from them on the north side. We came in from the south, went through them, and we were on the north side. And I'd taken my friend down. I told my daughter, stop. I took him down a little ways, and about 100 yards away, and I put him on a stand. I came back to my daughter, and I was telling her, look, just sit here and watch this valley. It's not a very big one, but those elk will run right up and down through here. I said, I'm going to take off to the west, to the right of her. And I said, I'm going to go down and see if I can't get them moving and stuff. And just as I said that, and I never heard of power knocks either. I wasn't in the BFRO or Bigfoot at that point, but right behind her, there was 3 knocks on this tree. It sounded like thunder going off. And it was a nice blue, clear sky, no wind. I mean, it was just, I can't even explain how loud this was. It was so loud, my daughter looked at me because she was facing north. I was facing south towards the trees. And I was looking over her right shoulder, looking back there at the trees, and she goes, what was that? And I said, well, I think it's a limb just fell out of a tree. And she goes, damn, that's one big limb. And I said, yeah, I think so. I didn't want to tell her what I thought was going on either. So I was sitting there thinking, this is probably not a good idea to leave her here and leave a coworker here that's pretty elderly. So I got a hold of him and I said, hey, come back up here to us. So he did. And then I told him, I said, hey, I don't think there's any elk in here. I think we just need to leave. I think we were being told to leave. We were given a very verbal, a very blunt warning, like it's time to go. Cause I think they were in there hunting too. So they said, yeah, let's get it. Matter of fact, when he walked up there, he goes, what was that sound we heard? I said, I don't know. Just limbs falling out of a tree or something. He goes, huh. We took off and walked back down to the cabins, and we just hunted in a different direction. So that was our encounter with my daughter, and a coworker.
Yeah, that Mount Adams, there's a lot of encounters that come out of there, a lot. And I've been in the area. I've never had anything happen, but I've had many eyewitnesses come forward that have experienced them in this area. And you have this encounter in 2016. You don't really go back for about another 6 years, and then you have that incident with your son and now your daughter. I ask everyone on the show, what do you think Sasquatch is? What's your take?
Yeah, I don't know. They have to be a hominid of some type. I've talked to people in Alaska. I've got really good friends we go up there every year on the Kenai. I don't know. It seems like those ones up there in Alaska, those things will kill you. But the ones down here in Washington, Oregon, California, they seem pretty docile. But I've heard reports of, I have a coworker I work with he's from southern Arkansas, and he heard me talking about it at work one day, and he looked at me and goes, "Oh, you're getting ready to go find you a wood bugger, huh?" And I was looking at him like, I don't even know what that is. What's a wood bugger? And he's like, "Well, that's what we call them down there in southern Arkansas. You guys call them Bigfoots up here." And I never even heard of wood bugger before. I'm like, what is that? But since then, I've heard of buggers and wood buggers down south, but they seem to be a lot more aggressive than the ones up here in the Pacific Northwest. Thank God.
Yeah, you'll definitely find more aggressive reports in the South. I'm really not sure why, but they do seem to be more aggressive. Yeah, but having said that, I think most of their behavior is meant to make you leave. It's meant to make you want to go away. Do they really want to fight? Probably not. And if they do, you're going to lose. But I'm not so sure that they're so quick to want to fight. I really think a lot of it is display, bravado, and it serves a purpose for you to go away. But I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I've enjoyed chatting with you, Virgil.
Well, thank you for having me on. I mean, yeah, it's just interesting to talk about this stuff. And and like I always tell the believers, I don't care if you believe me or not. I'm not here to convince anybody. I really could care less. This is just the experiences that I've had. And I'm not telling you I don't care less, but I know some people out there listening, they got nothing but negative to say. So, but I don't care about that anymore. I know these things are real.
Yeah, I always say it's a big joke and it's all fun and games until you run into one, and then it's not so fun anymore. But thank you again for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. It was really good talking to you.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Merry Christmas, everyone.